I'm living in a national heritage town in Mexico, and it has cobblestone streets and a lot of the old buildings, and it looks very similar to how it looked 300 years ago or more. And I ran into an American, and I was talking to him outside the little tienda, and he was complaining, and he said, they really ought to pave these streets, and they really ought to have street cleaners, these trucks that go by and collect the trash and sweep the streets. And he said, with a certain note of pride in his voice, I'm very clean. Well, um, maybe you should go back to the States, be clean there, because Mexico has its own ways. And just because you grew up in another culture and you can't see it, it doesn't make it wrong. Something I've noticed about Americans when they're in a foreign country is sometimes they're just very sure that what's going on around them is wrong and they don't like it. I have um, been in groups of Europeans, in this case, Italians, who the younger generation in the group did speak English pretty well. The older people didn't. And um, there was an American woman there who was married to someone whose grandparents were Italian but had immigrated to the States. And they were there reconnecting with his family. And she began to instruct them on how we do it in America. And I said, look, if they're interested, they'll ask. And then they came to visit us, and she just happened to say in one group conversation, I'm sure you don't speak as much French as you pretend to. And I was just kind of taken aback. I thought, what is that? I think I understand it a little bit better now. Americans grow up isolated, for one thing. They Europeans have these other countries that are close by, and they go on vacation there, and people from that country come, and they understand each other's um, mores, their habits, their languages, their history. Americans are unfortunately not only not well educated in that kind of thing, but they are geographically isolated. So they just never encounter it. I grew up in Texas where a lot of the population were in that part of the US way before the Anglos came, but they had been uh, put into second class citizens because they had darker skin and they spoke with an accent. The Spanish was their first language, and um, I always kind of wondered at that. And then when I started going to different countries, it never occurred to me to correct the people and say, no, what you're doing is wrong. It's not, that's not the right way to do it. Um, it just seems uh, bloated. It seems like it's full of a kind of ignorance and hubris at the same time. And it's kind of uniquely American. And they will walk into an establishment and start speaking English because they assume everybody in the world must speak their language. It doesn't occur to them that they need to learn that host language. Don't you find that strange? I do. I find it um, somewhere between stupid and uneducated. I don't even really know, but I think like when I watch Americans interact with other cultures, I think there is a kind of feeling of defensiveness. There's a kind of feeling maybe of inferiority. Now, of course, there are many Americans who are not like that. I'm not like that, and I'm American. And I've met many Americans who are quite good at languages and have traveled and lived all over the world and so on, but they are unusual, I would say. I think that they are a small percentage of the population. So why am I talking about this? Well, it seems to me that we do need to be broader and deeper than we are. And one way to do that is to get out of our little corner, our intellectual corner, our cultural corner, um, and come up against things we never encountered before. Right now, with Trump in the White House and his band of criminals just kind of wrecking everything, the number of Americans moving to foreign countries has increased dramatically. And a lot of these people are older and have never actually been outside the country. And they get there and they're shocked. Why does it take so long to do things? Why don't the waiters smile more? I don't know. The bureaucracy is laborious. It is time consuming. That's a very European thing. And um, if you're 50 years old or older, it's probably going to be hard for you to adapt to that. I, looking back now, I realize I was fortunate to be thrown into that environment when I was 20, 22. Um, and it was hard, but I did not assume I was right and they were wrong. I knew I had a lot to learn. Maybe because I was young and I hadn't solidified a lot of those mental habits, but I would imagine, because I've always been fascinated by other cultures and their history, especially their literary and art history, that that admiration is just a permanent thing with me. And I have seen people in my own family just think a culture that I really admire is ridiculous. It's just, they are stupid, those people. And I just am taken aback. I just can't imagine it. But to each his own. I do think that it would be very important for all of us to kind of realize that every human being is unique, every culture is different, and there's a lot to learn from that. Trying to make it homogeneous, trying to make it all the same and smooth it all out, like so you won't be challenged. I see these articles on how to move to another country. All the countries that speak English, where you won't have to worry. And I guess that is a market. That is something people demand. They don't want that challenge. That is one thing I it's absolutely essential for me to have that challenge. I've always known I was a little eccentric, and I guess this is part of it. I am never going to fit in. I'm always going to be an outsider. And you know what? It doesn't really bother me. Anyway, that's something to think about.